They've always been banned. At no point have they ever been legal.
He was just sitting in a pub ordering breakfast. The police have come in mob-handed and said, "You need to go."
I can't imagine why any international organisation or any international or any organisation would want to remove those words.
Welcome once again to the Aussie Wire News. Now, before we get stuck into today's news, time is running out to get your pre-ordered copy of the Good People Break Bad Laws book. This is my first ever book. It's available at goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com, and if you use the code TAW, that's T-A-W, then you'll actually get a 14% discount, and if you order as part of the pre-order, then you will get a personally signed copy in time for Christmas. Time is running out. Go to goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com to do that as soon as possible. Now, before we get started, I do want to say our very first story in today's episode is one that requires action from you. There is someone running a very important campaign, and time is almost out for you to be able to support that campaign and make sure that it has the biggest possible impact. So please watch the first story from today's news, pause the video, take action, and then come back and watch the rest of the video. Without further ado, here's today's news. Well, if you're a regular viewer of the Aussie Wire News, you'd be aware that the UN are trying to push through, or the World Health Organization specifically, are trying to push through a number of amendments to their global health regulations. There's a new treaty involved. It's all a bit confusing. I'll certainly put my hand up and say I'm not really understanding exactly what's being done, but there's someone I've brought on today to help me wrap my head around it, someone who's trying to actually make a bit of a difference, and that is Katrina Lane. Katrina, thank you so much for joining us here on the Aussie Wire.
Hey, Topher, good to be here. Thanks so much.
Now, Katrina, for those that may not be across this, we obviously get new viewers all the time. They may not be aware of what's actually going on. What's happening with these World Health Organizations, the treaty, all of that?
I think it's meant to be confusing. Not many people are across it, and the wonderful people at Australia Exit the WHO are probably the people that have been campaigning the longest about this. So there's three important things happening at the moment. At the same time, they're happening, and they're pulling a Swiftie, basically. I think that's a really nice way of saying they're trying to pull a Swiftie over us. So there's the Pandemic Preparedness Treaty, which is a treaty to do with pandemics alone. That's one thing. There are the 2022 International Health Regulation Amendments, which were adopted by our government in May this year. And there are the 2023 International Health Regulations, which will be tabled in January, and we'll have a period next year and into 2025 to reject them, adopt them, et cetera, et cetera. That's all up for discussion still. So there's three separate things happening, and they're all massive.
So when you say things happening, what are some of these amendments? What are the changes that they're making, and what's their rationale for it?
So the international health regulations haven't actually been changed since 2005.
Okay.
So we lived through the last 4 years under the 2005 version of those regulations. And we know how meddling the WHO was during that period.
Absolutely.
One of the big things that they want to do is they want to stop being an advisory body and become a legally binding body, so they can meddle even more. And that's part of the draft of the 2023 International Health Regulation Amendments. So they've staggered things very, very cleverly. Last year's amendments reduced timeframes for approval and adoption. So they sort of thought, okay, we'll get in there first. We'll reduce these timeframes that member nations have to consider and adopt our amendments. And then we'll hit them with the 307 amendments of 2023.
307?
With a very short. So this year they recommended 307 changes.
Right.
One of the big ones, as I said, is they want to change from being an advisory body to a legally binding body. So essentially we're acquiescing our sovereignty.
Yeah.
They think we're unable to govern ourselves. And we don't think we are, you know.
Well, I mean, this is one of the characteristics of someone who wants to be in something like the World Health Organization or work for the UN is that they think they're smarter than everybody else and that everyone should just do as they're told. I saw a fantastic presentation from Australia Exits the WHO at the Australians for Science and Freedom inaugural conference in Sydney 2 weekends ago. And one of the things that caught my eye there, and I'd love you to elaborate on, is that these amendments involve removing caveats around preserving human rights and respect for the individual and these sorts of things. tell us a bit about those amendments and why do you think that they feel the need to make those amendments?
I can't imagine why any international organisation or any organisation would want to remove those words. So they are in the drafts of the 307 amendments that have been tabled, that have been working on this year. So there's a working group in Geneva, a WHO working group, that have been given these 3 amendments, and they've been told to unpack them, have a look at them, draft them up so they can be presented to the Director General in January next year. That same working group is actually having issues with things like that. Right. So they've expressed concern around the removal of things like human rights.
Okay.
And they've indicated that their deadline of January won't be met because they can't come to an agreement and they can't complete the draft in time. The draft must be ready by January because there is a required lead time from when the working group presents their draft until May next year, when the member nations, including Australia, vote on these amendments. So there's trouble in paradise too. It's not just us having difficulty getting our heads around it. Their own working groups having difficulty. But yes, they have intended to, or I've seen the draft, and it is to remove those words. Even the word pandemic, it's not, it doesn't give power to the WHO in case of a pandemic. It's also in case of a presumed pandemic.
Yeah.
So it's not even required to declare a pandemic and then become overbearing. They can just assume or be concerned there might be some trouble somewhere.
Yeah, potential pandemic. Now, you spoke of trouble in paradise. We've just seen recently there's a couple of European countries that have now come out quite strongly and said that they're not going to be backing these. Bring us up to date on that. And what does that mean? What does it mean for a member country to say no, thank you? Can they really say no?
Not really, no. Well, they can say no. So only a 2/3 majority is required to vote this in. So even if Slovenia and Slovakia and New Zealand all on the weekend came out and said that they've decided they're not going to go with these amendments, if they're in the minority and they wish to stay a member nation, they'll have to comply.
I see.
So people like Senator Malcolm Roberts, who's a national hero in my view, he's for, and people like Senator Babette, they're of the idea that we should be removed from the WHO.
Yep.
And that's why, because we don't actually have a choice unless we're in the majority.
So this could create a very interesting situation where potentially they get the 2/3, the amendments are rammed through, and then a number of the countries that represent the less than 1/3 that were opposed may actually then view that as a trigger for them to actually exit the WHO entirely?
Yeah, maybe, yeah. I mean, there's certainly benefits of working internationally and working with groups internationally, but to be told how we have to manage our own country, particularly in times of crisis. You know, a response to any crisis should be nuanced, you know, according to location and the people and the resources at hand and all the different things. You can't just have a broad brush approach to anything like that. Yeah. So everyone has to have their independence.
Sorry, I cut you off.
That's okay. Independence is a really, really important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I've got no issue with international collaboration, but it has to be voluntary and it cannot supersede your own government doing what's in the best interest of your own people. So before we go into what you're actually doing and how you're assisting with the pushback here, tell me a little bit about yourself. Have you been running campaigns for a long time? Is this something that you've been passionate about for decades? Are you relatively new? Was it COVID that kind of got you into this? Tell me a bit about your story.
I grew up in a very awake family, and I was terribly embarrassed with them for most of my life because I just wanted mum and dad to go and play tennis like everyone else instead of having house meetings about one world governments and world banks.
Sure.
So I'm very grateful to them. But I've been a campaigner for sustainable food systems in a localism sense for a very long time. Done lots of work around food security and the importance of supporting local economies and that kind of thing. So, and this is the same thing. It's about decentralisation, and people work best and function best and flourish best when they're left to in a smaller community rather than trying to have an overbearing governance from far away.
Well,
so that's really my background. Yeah.
Decentralisation is a topic very close to my heart. So you've won me over with that one. Now you are involved in a campaign right now. This is. Remind me, it's standupnowaustralia.com.au, I believe is the URL. Tell us what this is about and what you're hoping to achieve with this.
Yeah, so Stand Up's a community advocacy group that started in 2020. And we just have themes of the month and provide information for people so they can, because as you know, information has been somewhat lopsided over the last few years.
Absolutely.
So we just provide information about all different types of topics. And through the months of October and November, we decided to talk about government overreach. So we've had a lot to talk about. And the last part of this theme, we've concentrated on this campaign. So we've talked to lots of politicians. I've talked to many senators over the last month. I won't name names, but I can tell you there are some of them who have signed off on things on behalf of the people of Australia, and they have no recollection of doing it.
Yeah, wow.
It's really freaking serious, the lack of awareness that's going on in our government about this. And very patronisingly, I'm told very often that as if the WHO would do anything to harm us or put us in a situation of crisis, we're all on the same side.
Yeah, well, I mean, the last 3 years haven't been a cautionary tale at all, have they? They haven't been
not at all,
a warning.
no.
Now, you've actually got something specific going on here, and I wish I'd come across you a few weeks ago, and I'm grateful to Rebecca Barnett, one of our Aussie Wire-affiliated journalists, for actually bringing me to your attention, but it is very last minute. You've got this thing called the People's Letter here. It's on your website, standupnowaustralia.com.au. What's this letter about? What's it supposed to achieve? And I believe the deadline for it is literally tomorrow.
It's Friday. Oh, yes, sorry, tomorrow, because this is going air on Thursday.
Yeah.
So this is the People's Letter. So Voices for Freedom in New Zealand had huge success with this. As you know, the new coalition government in New Zealand has decided to vote no against the WHO. And so with inspiration and their permission, we have plagiarised. We have taken their content,
You were
but with
inspired
permission.
by...
We were very much inspired by their good work. And so we've written a People's Letter. So a very, very clever human rights lawyer has helped us write a letter that will be delivered to the Director General of the WHO on Friday in Geneva.
Wow.
And this letter is a letter on behalf of the people saying due process has not happened, consultation has not happened, our government has not represented its people. We do not feel represented by our government, and therefore we're writing a letter on our own behalf. We've had over 10,000. We've had over 10,000 signatures in the first 24 hours. It's been amazing.
Wow.
And numbers are. It's been fantastic. The collaboration and the reach that we've got. So,
well, let's.
You can jump on the website.
Let's try and pump those numbers up. And so where do we find this? So obviously it's standupnowaustralia.com.au / the People's Letter, is it?
Yeah, or if you just go onto the homepage, it's right there in front of you. You can't miss it. We've made it very bright yellow.
Yep.
If that's right, that's the homepage.
Yep.
So you can click on the People's Letter there, that blue and black button.
Yep.
You can read the People's Letter first if you'd like to. You can read about it. There's more information there. There's lots more content if you want to get your head around what the heck's going on with the WHO. And then sign it. It's just a jot form. All it asks for is your name, your email address and postcode. We don't want anyone else's details. And that's it. And we ask you to share it. It's a really simple thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Katrina Lane, I wish we had a lot more people like you. I applaud what you're doing. Thank you so much for, there's a lot of people that throw their hands up in the air when it comes to these sorts of things. And they say, oh, well, it's the UN. What can you do? There's no, what chance do we have? All these sorts of despairing, I refer to them as black pill kind of responses. And then we see people like yourself who are saying, you know what, my hands are small, I know, but they're not yours. They are my own. If I can do a bit of plagiarism of my own, of some lyrics there. And I applaud it. I wish we would see a lot more of it. I'm so grateful that you have stood up. Katrina Lane, thank you so much for joining us here on the Aussie Wire.
Oh, thanks for having us so much, Topher. Thank you.
Well, I don't know if you've noticed, but recently the UK has been back in the headlines. Ireland's going nuts, England itself kind of going nuts, all in different ways, but all seemingly related. And in an effort to try and make sense of it, I thought instead of looking at it from afar, I would invite on a guest who is there and can help us to try and break down and understand what in the world is wrong with the UK right now. In an effort to try and answer that question, Charlie Sansom joins me. Charlie, thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, for those that don't know your name, and over here in Australia, obviously, we're not in the news cycle the same as we are in the UK. Can you tell me, or tell our viewers the story you were just telling me off air about how you became a household name in the UK for a week?
Yes, I was a Conservative Party chairman in the UK during the COVID pandemic, and the government over here wanted to start a program of mandatory vaccinations and vaccine passports to go down the pub and see your mates and things like that. And I was invited onto the BBC in my job and asked how I felt about these plans. And I was so outraged, I called the Conservative Party tyrants and I quit my job live on air.
Well, that is one way to do it. That is definitely going out with a bang. Massive respect to you for having the principles to give up that position, any prestige and the influence that came with that on a point of principle like that. Now, the thing that brings us together today, and I mean, there's so many different stories to talk about. What's happening in the UK right now is just off the chain. But I wanted to talk about what just happened to Tommy Robinson, a name that's familiar to many of my viewers, no doubt. Someone who, again, has stood on principle, similar to yourself, time and time again. He's just been arrested again. What's going on?
It seems to me that Tommy can do no right. He's recently been allowed back on social media by Elon Musk, and people have questioned that and said, well, what's the motive? Why has he been let back on now? There's all this racial tension, should we call it, in England, where it's Palestine marches here, Israel marches on the other weekend, and people not kind of agreeing on anything to do with that conflict in the Middle East. And they're kind of trying to portray him as this agitator because of his history protesting against radical Islam in the UK. So my personal view, he's being picked on for his views, but he hasn't actually said anything that anyone disagrees with.
Well, it's interesting. He was here attending this march against anti-Semitism. He's accused of being a racist and a Semite, anti-Semite and all of that sort of thing. He was there working as a journalist covering the event, and he was arrested by what has to be described as a small army of police officers. I mean, I've seen abuse of power in the past, but how many officers do you estimate there were?
Easily 40 or 50. Looking at the videos, I mean, I wasn't in London today, but I would say looking at the tapes, 40 to 50.
Yeah. Now, this is what Tommy had to say here upon his release. We'll look at a video of his release in just a moment. But this really struck a chord with me as I was researching this story, because I can resonate with it, and so many of our viewers here at the Aussie Wire will resonate very deeply with this sentiment from Tommy. He says, I've been given bail conditions, obviously, to prevent me from entering London or partaking in any future demonstrations, which is a blatant abuse of my human rights. Now, this is exactly what we saw Victoria Police doing in Melbourne during the COVID lockdowns to stop people from participating in anti-lockdown protests. This sort of abuse of the power of arrest, the abuse of bail, is this happening widely in the UK, or is this something unique to Tommy?
I think, well, it's hard for me to tell, actually, because Tommy's so famous that everything that happens to him gets put in the news. So whether this is commonplace, I don't know. I doubt it. There's no doubt that the police do dish out Section 35 orders for people that are causing trouble, but everyone has seen what I've seen over here in the UK, at least, which is that he was just sitting in a pub ordering breakfast. The police have come in mob-handed and said, you need to go. Yeah. And there's only one reason they've done that, and that's because they don't like him, and the people on the march apparently didn't like him. I don't know how much of that I actually believe, because I don't see how you can say that he would cause distress amongst the public there when he's supporting that march.
And honestly, the very concept that we're going to arrest you because your existence, your presence might cause distress. I mean, I can understand that in the case of, let's take a completely unrelated example, a domestic abuse victim would potentially be distressed by the presence of their abuser at an event. That I could understand. But the idea that someone who has expressed ideas and spoken words would then cause distress by showing up to a march that he's actually spoken words in support of, at least in the past, maybe not in this contemporary example, but in the past he's expressed support for these same ideas. That sounds like they were just scraping the bottom of the barrel for any excuse they could find to try and exclude him.
A part of me believes that they do certain things to put things in the papers as if to create a wider message.
Sure. As
in, you are thinking the way that Tommy thinks, or if you do have an outlook on the world which is not the way the establishment want you to look at things, don't come.
Yeah.
And because he, like I said, he's famous, he will become a headline. And I didn't see any fuss until the police turned up, which is the same as what happened on Armistice Day over here, when the police made a big deal about blocking patriotic Brits from going to look at the cenotaph and stand silently at the cenotaph, is that they created a problem by backing up people without any just cause and saying, hold on a minute, you can't come down here. And naturally people are saying, well, hold on, we're just British citizens. We want to go and pay our respects. Why are you stopping us going down here? The police very rarely give answers. They just obfuscate and avoid things and just keep repeating themselves without actually giving you any information. So naturally people get annoyed. But from what I can see of this, they've turned up, mob-handed, they've made the situation worse. The papers are there. They're asking him his home address on camera. They've got Sky News there. They've got the BBC, other places, and they're asking him where he lives on camera. You know, this guy has had so many threats to his life and so many threats to his family's well-being. Why would they do that?
Well, another thing, I don't want to play the arrest video. I just find that stuff a bit too close to home after all that I've been through, and so many of my viewers would feel the same way. But in the arrest video, you can hear the police officers saying, stop resisting, stop resisting. But of course, what they do, and I've experienced this and I've seen this, they put you into a duress position where your arm is stretched to the point that you're afraid it's about to break. And so, of course, you're just trying to not have your arm broken, and then they call that resisting. And they ended up pepper spraying him in the face. Yet another, I think, flagrant abuse of his rights. Now, you've mentioned a few times that, of course, he's very famous now because of the stances that he's taken in the past. Here is none other than Douglas Murray, someone who I spent a bit of time with at the ARC launch in London just a couple of weeks ago, and someone who I immensely respect, making a point here about the contrast between the treatment of someone like Tommy Robinson, who really has said nothing, and the treatment of Mohammed Hijab, who has said things that would have to be described as inflammatory, and I think I'm being nice. To what degree are ordinary Britons aware of this double standard? Is this something that you and your fellow travellers are aware of and not the average person? To what degree does the average person see this?
I think a lot of people, when you talk about things like the disparities between treatments of races, it's obvious. You know, there is, from what I can tell, an attack on white men. And that sounds extreme and it sounds implausible being in England, which is a majority white country. But the things that you can get away with if you're not straight, white and male is incredible. I mean, the reason why Mohammed Hijab gets away with what he gets away with is because Muslims typically have a tribal mentality. If you pick on one, you've picked on 10. And that's the same with the traveling community over here as well. If you pick on a gypsy, you know, it's not just one gypsy you picked on 100. And that's typically why I think they get away with things and why they're allowed to walk the streets and say what they want to say. Because if the police intervene, what are they likely to do? They're more likely to get violent in that group, in that tribal thinking and having that tribal mentality, that they're not going to win. So I think there is an element of fear on the part of the police and the authorities. I think they do have an element of, what could happen next? And I don't blame them for that in a way, because I think the circumstances in this country have allowed groups like this to have free reign and to do whatever they want. And would you want to put your life at risk for 30 grand a year? I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's understandable. Yes, I don't disagree with that, but that doesn't make it any less concerning. And how long can a nation really survive in a situation where even your law enforcement are unable or unwilling to enforce laws? Now, you had a bit of a commentary on this that caught my eye as well, and I'd love it if you'd actually read this out for us. It goes over a couple of screens here, but this is your tweet in response to Tommy Robinson, yes, being arrested, but also being tear-gassed, and really laying out these problems that we're discussing. If you'd read that for us, please.
No problem. Tommy Robinson tear-gassed for what? There is now no doubt two-tier policing exists in the UK. The Met Police should be utterly ashamed for this assault on a man that did nothing but ask questions as to why he was being removed from London and prevented from doing his job. We have open hostilities on the streets of our capital city since October 7th, and the police have seldom responded in any way that would satisfy a concerned British citizen. Instead, they sent what looked like a small army to arrest Tommy Robinson under the guise of preventing public distress. If you watch the videos leading up to Tommy's removal by the old Bill, there are easily heard shouts of "We love you, Tommy," whilst he tries to protect his children by avoiding on-camera questioning about his home address. When asking the public if anyone was distressed by Tommy's presence, the public responded to him that they weren't. So to whom was this alleged distress being caused, and where was the potential for any civil unrest? We, the British public, are becoming tired and frustrated by this continual degradation of our civil liberties. If we cannot ask questions and hold authorities to account, we are no longer a democracy, if we ever were. Is this the Britain we want to live in? We need serious changes.
Now, there's some heavy content in there, but this phrase, "we are no longer a democracy if we ever were." Of course, England is regarded around the world and certainly regarded by Australians as very much the home of democracy. We inherited the Westminster system from you. The Magna Carta, of course, a famous historical document, not really respected throughout most of history, but nevertheless it exists, and it was created in England. And we have so many of our human rights thanks to great English thinkers. John Locke, of course, comes to mind as one of the preeminent among them. What the hell happened?
I think that the left infiltrated everything that matters the most in Britain, which is the liberty to speak and to move freely. And I do not believe that any political party in the UK has the backbone that sits in Parliament to make any changes. Labour would be far worse than the Conservative Party, but the Conservatives are no longer Conservative. They're very left-leaning. And people believe that because the branding says Conservative, then they must be, but they're not. If you can't question these people as to why they're doing what they're doing without facing arrest or facing the loss of your job or facing social ostracisation, then you don't live in a democracy. If you're being ostracised from society because of your viewpoints and because you've asked a question, no one can say that's democratic. We might live under the pretense that we're democratic, but I don't think we actually are anymore.
Well, there'll be an awful lot of people listening from Australia going, wow, yeah, I hear you. Sounds like you're describing Australia right now as well. So what's the way back from here? How do we be constructive about looking for and perhaps helping to create some sort of a solution to this?
You need political changes, but political change will cost money. And the financial backers of political parties are going to look at what they can do to hold on to their existing power. So are they going to go with something new and radical, which actually gives the liberty back to the people? Probably not. It will take someone with a backbone inside the Conservative Party or the Labour Party, which is highly doubtful on both parts, to make a stand and say, we're not doing this anymore. Do I think it will happen anytime soon? No. It might happen in the future, but it's going to take a lot worse things to happen. I mean, look at Ireland, for example. You mentioned that earlier on, that things are falling apart in Ireland as well. If England gets like Ireland and people are openly rioting the way they were in Dublin, then you might see some changes. But until then, I doubt it.
Well, that's a sobering note to finish on, but we have to be honest. We have to look at reality the way that it is. The home of freedom, the modern home of freedom in any case, is certainly looking not very free at the moment. Thank you so much for bringing us this story. I look forward to catching up with you again as things unfold. There's a lot more topics, a lot more things that I'd love to ask you about to do with my own time in London. I was there for the ARC launch a little while ago. I've got so many questions, but they'll have to wait for another day. Charlie, thank you so much for joining us here on the Aussie Wire.
Thank you so much.
Well, Australia has for a long time had some of the strictest laws around smoking and tobacco consumption, and quite remarkably has the strictest laws that I'm aware of, and my next guest will correct me if I'm wrong, around vaping. Now, vaping is a life-saving tool. It's regarded by the UK College of Surgeons as at least 95% safer than cigarettes. We've covered all of that here on the Aussie Wire in the past. But not content with the harshest laws in the world, the federal government has just introduced a ban on single-use vapes. Here to talk about the implications is Brian Marlow from Legalise Vaping Australia. Brian, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Now, it's my understanding that the thing they've just banned was already kind of supposed to be banned. What exactly are they doing, and what is this ban?
Yeah, so just to be clear, the health minister's out there saying that he's taking really strong action to ban disposable vapes that come into the country. Now, about 100 million of these products come into the country every single year. They've always been banned. At no point have they ever been legal.
Right.
So what he's announcing is that he's going to ban a product that is already banned, and that's going to stop them.
He's going to ban them even harder.
These products, pardon?
He's going to ban them even harder.
Yeah, he's going to make the illegal product even more illegal. Is effectively what they're saying. So, 100 million of these products come into Australia every single year. They're sold by crime syndicates. Criminals are happy to break the law and sell to kids. And effectively, what he's saying is, as of January 1st, 2024, I'm going to tell Border Force, who I might add, Border Force are on the record as saying that they can't stop these products.
Right.
He's going to tell Border Force to really, really super duper stop them this time.
Right. That seems like a really great use of taxpayer money and our border forces' time and attention. I mean, it's a good thing there are no other issues in this country that need to be addressed. From the government's point of view, though, if I can play devil's advocate for a second, what they're saying is that there is an issue with young people taking up vaping. They are particularly prone or particularly likely to be using these sorts of very cheap, disposable, single-use type vape apparatuses. Do they have a point? Is there a problem here that at least needs to be addressed, if not in this way, in some way?
Yeah, so there's absolutely a problem and it needs to be addressed. But the problem is that they've created the issue. So the Labor government has overseen, under their watch, something like an almost five-fold increase in youth vaping. And it's all happened as a result of a blanket sort of prohibition on any kind of regulatory or legalisation framework on high-quality vapes that you see in New Zealand, in UK, and all throughout Europe. So to run through some numbers, about 90 to 92% of all vapes in Australia are sold through the black market. So it's not some small figure. It's over 90% of vapes are black market vapes. And the government's response is that they're just going to ban the products that are already banned. They're not actually, to make matters worse, they're not actually giving any more money to law enforcement. So Border Force, who are tasked with stopping these products coming into the country, they've actually had over $500 million taken away from them. So the Border Force agent is supposed to look out for contraband, firearms, illicit drugs, any kind of, maybe some bombs coming through the mail.
Animals
but also,
that are banned,
while he's doing that, he's meant to keep an eye out for, a mango-flavored vape that's coming in from China. It boggles the mind. Now, what the government said is that after January 1st, when they get around to March, they'll then pass a whole raft of legislations to ban any sale of vaping products within the country and shut down any of the few remaining law-abiding shops that actually abide by the existing laws and just shut them down completely. So all they're going to do is make the black market even worse.
Look, I've never particularly been interested in vaping myself. I'm a cigar smoker, never had a cigarette in my life, but I do enjoy cigars. But I tell you what, if they're going to ban it, as this coverage from The Guardian says, then look, all of a sudden I'm interested. If they're going to try and keep it away from me, then all of a sudden, I mean, it must be good, right? And this is the problem with bans. They've never worked. The prohibition in the 1920s and 30s in the US didn't work. Talk to us a little bit about the consequences of the growth, I guess, in black market tobacco, as well as obviously black market vapes, as you've just covered, as a result of these bans and the punitive taxes.
Yeah, so right now, about 1 in 3, up to 1 in 3 tobacco products sold are black market products. And as I said, 90% of vaping products sold in Australia are black market products. And they're not sold by some guy just selling under the counter to make an extra buck. They're imported by triads and they're distributed by Chinese triad gangs, but also bikie gangs. So down in Victoria right now, there have been fire bombings on shops over turf wars, over who can sell what illegal vape or tobacco product where. There's even been people shot dead on the street. So, we look back at Prohibition America when the mafia was running around killing people over who could sell their illicit alcohol. And we're seeing the exact same here. But it's for a product that every single one of our Western counterparts uses as a way to help people quit smoking. So we've created a black market that benefits criminals on a product that's 95% less harmful than cigarettes.
Well, this is one of the extraordinary things. I did some coverage of the vaping issue pre-COVID, in the BC days, the before COVID days when the world went mad. And it was quite remarkable, the number of people that came out of the woodwork. I put the call out and said, hey, if you've used vapes, can you tell me about your experience? Were they good? Were they bad? How's your health, etc.? People were falling all over themselves to come out of the woodwork and tell me how vapes had changed their lives for the better. They'd been a pack-a-day smoker, they'd tried the patches, they'd tried this, they'd tried that, nothing had worked, and then vaping worked for them. Sometimes instantly, sometimes over a period of transition, but it's without question saved an enormous number of lives. I can't help but be amused by the contrast between what we're seeing here from Mark Butler, the Health Minister, and this Labor government here in Australia, and what we're seeing happening in New Zealand right now, because we've just had the news come out, this newly minted New Zealand government is actually winding back the prohibition or the attempted elimination, really, of tobacco use in New Zealand. What direction are they going in, and what's the rationale they're putting forward for why they're heading the way they are?
Well, so they've been leading the charge when it comes to this space of vaping and tobacco. New Zealand historically didn't have regulations on tobacco, on vaping products, and they had a similar issue where there was a big black market that was starting to take a foothold in that country. Thankfully, their health bureaucrats seem to actually look at the evidence and then adjust their position as the evidence changes. And what they decided to do was regulate and legalise vaping products in New Zealand. The black market has all but disappeared when it comes to vaping products there.
Sure.
And youth vaping in New Zealand is actually reducing. It's not increasing like it is here. On tobacco, it's almost a similar story. So the previous Ardern government wanted to move some, world first generational smoking ban. So if you were born after a certain date, you would never be able to legally buy cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all that does is provide an incentive for black market operations to import dodgy tobacco products and sell them to those people, because there will be people, regardless of what the law says, that want to smoke cigarettes. So the new government's obviously looked at that evidence and adjusted their position. They've got rid of it. And to be honest, regardless of whether we think tobacco products are bad, obviously they are. Cigarettes kill 52 Australians every day from associated illnesses. At the end of the day, if you're an adult, you should be able to make choices for yourself, whether those choices are good or whether they're bad. Now, I'll tell you that you shouldn't smoke, but the idea that the government should just go in and ban any future generations from accessing a product when they become an adult is just, it's a really bad, it's a very bad precedent to set.
Well, coming back to vapes in Australia, these single-use vapes and this ban, what would you propose as a better alternative if we recognise that young people getting a hold of vapes and getting addicted to nicotine is not ideal? And look, I'm a libertarian, but I'd agree with you. It's not ideal. I don't like to see that happening. What's a better way to try and tackle a problem like that?
Yeah, so the easiest option is just to follow what the UK and New Zealand is doing, which is they legislate and they regulate vaping products in a similar way that they do with tobacco. Now, they don't tax them the same because vaping products don't harm you like cigarettes do. But they allow those products to be legislated and regulated, which means that consumers have access to pretty high quality products and they're able to quit smoking with them. What we're proposing isn't rocket science. We're just saying, look at what the UK is doing, look at what all of our European counterparts are doing, and look at what New Zealand's doing, and just hit copy paste.
Yeah.
And we know it will work. And I think for some of your viewers, I guess the question I would ask them is, maybe you don't like vaping, maybe you hate cigarettes, that's fine. But you've only got two options. The third option, which is let's just make all the products go away, that'll never happen. So you have an option where you can regulate these products, you can tax them to some extent, and you can use that money to help fund education programs and fund law enforcement. Or you can let people who shoot each other in the streets over turf wars over who can sell these products to kids exist. Those are the only two options you have. You don't have an option where vaping and tobacco goes away.
Well, given those options, our federal government has opted for the latter, with people shooting each other in the street for the right to sell vapes to kids. Unfortunately, that does seem to be par for the course in this country with the quality of our politics. We'll keep an eye on this story, and I do hope we see a change of heart. We've seen things change very quickly in New Zealand recently, and I do hope to see something like that in the future. Brian Marlow, thank you so much for joining us here on the Aussie Wire.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for watching today's episode of the Aussie Wire News. You can catch up on past episodes at theaussiewire.com. We release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, and the best way to be kept up to date is to actually join the email list at theaussiewire.com so that you hear about everything as it happens. We send a weekly roundup at the end of every week, and you'll miss out on nothing. Now, you also need to follow us on all of our socials because, well, there's a lot of good stuff coming. Last episode, we mentioned that we put on Anna McGovern, a new full-timer who's working with us here at the Aussie Wire, and she's in charge of our social media, and boy, is she doing an amazing job. So there's a huge amount of content going out on social media now. You need to make sure you're following us at the Aussie Wire on every single platform so you don't miss a thing. And finally, please consider becoming an insider. That's a financial supporter of the Aussie Wire. Now, insiders get exclusive content, they get giveaways, they get discounts, they get early access to tickets and all kinds of different goodies that we've got planned for the year ahead. So to become an insider, find the link in the description and support us as we bring you truth, freedom and hope. My name's Topher Field, and this is the Aussie Wire.